Subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of Carlton Benson's small apartment, casting striped shadows across the worn hardwood floor. At 78, he'd grown accustomed to the cramped quarters. The single bedroom with its creaking bed, the kitchenette barely large enough to turn around in, the bathroom where the shower head dripped a steady rhythm at night. This wasn't where he'd imagined spending his final years, but it was where his daughter-in-law, Christy, had decided he belonged. Carlton sat at his small desk, a battered oak piece he'd salvaged from a university surplus sale decades ago, and carefully adjusted his reading glasses. Before him lay a leather portfolio, its surface cracked with age but still dignified. Inside were documents he'd been organizing for months, some dating back 40 years, others fresh from his attorney's office just last week. He ran his weathered fingers across the papers, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Grandpa." The voice came through his cell phone, tinny but warm. Jordan Benson, his 19-year-old grandson, the one bright spot in Carlton's otherwise dim family landscape. "Jordan, my boy, how are you feeling? Big day tomorrow." "Nervous." A pause, then quieter. "I wish you were sitting with us. With the family." Carlton's jaw tightened. He'd received his instructions from Christy just that morning, a cold text message informing him that there would be limited seating in the family section, and perhaps it would be best if he sat toward the rear of the auditorium. "Don't make a scene," she'd written. "This day is about Jordan, not about you trying to insert yourself where you don't belong." "I'll be there, Jordan. That's what matters." "Mom's been." Jordan trailed off. At 19, he was old enough to see his mother's true nature, but still young enough to feel guilty about acknowledging it. "Never mind. Hey, did you know they're announcing some new research center at the ceremony?" Mom's all excited because she thinks it might be named after the Whitney family. You know, the Whitneys who donate to everything. She's been networking like crazy. Carlton's smile widened. "Is that so?" "Yeah. She's already planning which family to schmooze at the reception afterward. I think she's hoping Dad, can get some business connections out of it." Jordan sighed. "I hate when she uses my graduation for her social climbing. Tomorrow will be full of surprises, my boy. I promise you that." After hanging up, Carlton returned to his documents. His mind drifted back across the decades, to a time when his name meant something in academic circles. Dr. Carlton Benson. Not that anyone in his immediate family except Jordan knew about the doctorate. To them, he was just Grandpa, the retired high school science teacher who lived on a modest pension and Social Security. The truth was far more complex. In 1978, Carlton had published groundbreaking research in molecular biology that had revolutionized how scientists understood cellular regeneration. He'd been offered positions at Harvard, MIT, Stanford, but he'd chosen to stay at Whitmore University, a mid-tier institution in their city, because he believed in building something from nothing. For 30 years, he'd poured his grant money, his consulting fees, his speaking honoraria, everything back into the university. He'd built the molecular biology program from a single lab into a nationally recognized research powerhouse. He'd also quietly amassed a considerable fortune. Patents from his research, royalties from his textbooks, wise investments suggested by colleagues in the business school. By the time he retired at 65, Carlton's net worth exceeded $12 million, none of which his daughter-in-law knew. When Carlton's wife Sylvia had died 8 years ago, his son Paul had been grieving, vulnerable. Christy Thayer had appeared like a vulture circling carrion. She was 15 years younger than Paul, beautiful in a calculated way, and she'd recognized Paul's inheritance prospects immediately. What she hadn't recognized was that Carlton had no intention of being a convenient ATM machine for his son's gold-digging wife. Carlton had played it smart. He'd moved into this small apartment, claiming his pension was stretched thin. He dressed simply, driven an old car, clipped coupons at the grocery store. He'd watched Christie's mask slip gradually over the years, revealing the contempt beneath. She'd started small, forgetting to invite him to family dinners, making comments about his old person smell, suggesting he was becoming forgetful when he remembered things perfectly well. Then she'd escalated. She convinced Paul that Carlton was a burden, that his presence made their social circles uncomfortable, that Jordan was embarrassed by his grandfather's shabby appearance. None of it was true. Jordan loved Carlton fiercely, visited him every week despite Christie's objections. But Paul, ground down by years of Christie's manipulation, had become a ghost of the man he'd been, successful in business but hollow in spirit. Carlton had endured it all, documenting everything with the methodical precision of a scientist. He'd installed a small recording device in his hearing aid during family gatherings. He'd saved every dismissive text, every cruel email. He'd hired a private investigator 6 months ago, a woman named Laura Lester who'd uncovered truths that made Carlton's blood run cold. Christie was having an affair with Stuart Mosley, Paul's business partner. She'd been systematically stealing from Paul's company accounts, small amounts that wouldn't trigger immediate attention, but that totaled nearly $300,000 over 2 years. She'd forged Carlton's signature on documents attempting to claim power of attorney, planning to drain his supposed meager savings and put him in the cheapest nursing home she could find. She'd even tried to turn Jordan against him, telling the boy that Carlton disapproved of his choice to major in environmental science, that Carlton thought Jordan was wasting his potential. Jordan had confronted Carlton about it, and Carlton had gently revealed the truth, showing his grandson old photographs of his research in environmental applications of molecular biology. Their bond had only strengthened. Now, Carlton carefully placed a specific document on top of his portfolio, the program for tomorrow's graduation ceremony. His name appeared 3 times. Once in the list of distinguished alumni being honored. Once in the announcement of the Carlton Benson Center for Advanced Molecular Research, funded by a $10 million endowment he'd quietly established over the past 2 years. And once in the scholarship recipients list, where Jordan Benson had received the inaugural Carlton Benson Excellence Scholarship, full tuition for graduate school. Tomorrow, everything would change. Carlton stood, his knees protesting slightly, and walked to his closet. Behind his everyday clothes hung a garment bag. Inside was a tailored suit he'd had custom-made 3 months ago, along with the academic regalia from his doctorate and a medallion he'd received from the National Science Foundation. He touched the fabric gently. "Tomorrow, Sylvia," he whispered to his late wife's photograph on the nightstand, "Justice comes home to roost." The next morning arrived with deceptive calm. Carlton woke at 5, his usual time, and went through his careful preparations. He'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't about expensive things. It was about precision, care, attention to detail. He shaved meticulously, trimmed his silver hair, polished his shoes until they gleamed. By 9 o'clock, he was standing outside the Whitmore University auditorium, his suit jacket draped over one arm, watching the crowds gather. Families streamed in, excited graduates in caps and gowns, proud parents with cameras. He spotted Paul and Christie arriving in their Mercedes, Jordan walking slightly apart from them, his shoulders tense. Christie wore a designer dress that probably cost more than Carlton's monthly pension, her highlighted hair swept into an elegant updo, her makeup flawless. She was laughing at something Stuart Mosley had said. Yes, there he was, walking beside them like he belonged, his hand resting too familiarly on the small of Christie's back when Paul turned away. Carlton felt a flicker of pity for his son. Paul had gained weight, lost hair, developed the perpetually tired look of a man who'd stopped fighting. He deserved better. He deserved better for years. "Grandpa," Jordan broke away from his parents, jogging over with his graduation gown flapping. He hugged Carlton tightly. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it for the world, son." "Jordan," Christie's voice cut across the lawn like a knife. "We need to get you checked in. Come along." Jordan pulled back, rolling his eyes affectionately at Carlton. "See you inside?" "Absolutely." Christie approached, her smile so fake it could have been plastic. "Carlton, how nice that you could attend." Her eyes flicked over his appearance, and he saw the slight confusion. He looked better than usual, more put together. But she dismissed it quickly. "Now, about seating. I'm sure you understand that space in the family section is quite limited. The university has very strict policies about who can sit where. I've arranged for you to have a lovely spot toward the back. Much better for someone your age, really. Less strain on the knees going up and down stairs." Carlton nodded slowly. Of course, Christy. Whatever you think is best. She blinked, surprised by his easy compliance. She'd been prepared for an argument. Well, good. That's good. She glanced at Paul, who stood several feet away, deliberately not meeting Carlton's eyes. We should go. Important people to greet. As they walked away, Jordan looked back, his expression apologetic. Carlton gave him a small wave. An hour later, Carlton sat in the last row of the auditorium, surrounded by strangers. From here, he could barely see the stage, though the large screens flanking it provided a clearer view. He watched the family section, 15 rows from the front, where Christy sat beside Paul, Stuart Mosley on her other side. She was leaning towards Stuart, whispering something that made him laugh. The ceremony began with the usual pomp, the processional, the national anthem, welcome remarks from university officials. Carlton waited patiently, his portfolio resting on his lap. Then President Martha Katz took the podium. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, someone Carlton had mentored during her early years as a biology professor before she transitioned into administration. They'd maintained a quiet correspondence over the years. Before we begin conferring degrees, President Katz announced, we have several special recognitions to make. This year marks the 70th anniversary of Whitmore University's commitment to scientific research and innovation. To honor that legacy, we are announcing the establishment of a new research facility that will position Whitmore as a leader in molecular biology for generations to come. Christy sat up straighter, Carlton noticed on the screen. She was probably already rehearsing her introduction to the Whitney family. The Carlton Benson Center for Advanced Molecular Research, President Katz continued, made possible by a transformative gift of $10 million from Dr. Carlton Benson himself, will open next fall. The auditorium erupted in applause. Carlton watched Christy's face on the screen. Confusion flickered across her features. Carlton Benson? That was her father-in-law's name, but Dr. Benson, President Katz said, her voice warm, if you're in attendance, would you please join me on stage? The applause grew louder. Carlton stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. Around him, people craned their necks, looking for this mysterious benefactor. He stepped into the aisle and began the long walk toward the front. On the screen, he could see Christy's face clearly now. Her mouth had fallen open. Her eyes were wide with shock. Paul looked equally stunned. Even Stuart Mosley had lost his smug expression. But it was Jordan's face that made Carlton's heart swell. His grandson was standing, applauding wildly, his face split in a huge grin. He'd known. Somehow, Carlton realized Jordan had figured it out, or at least suspected. Carlton climbed the stairs to the stage with steady steps. He shook President Katz's hand, and she leaned in to whisper, perfect timing, old friend. The applause died down. President Katz gestured for Carlton to take the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, then down at the family section. Christy had gone pale. Paul's hands were trembling. Stuart Mosley was already inching toward the aisle, perhaps sensing danger. Thank you, Carlton began, his voice steady and strong. I'm deeply honored by this recognition. But before we continue, I need to address something personal, something that speaks to the values this university has always championed: integrity, truth, and justice. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the usual acceptance speech. Carlton reached into his portfolio and pulled out a folder. You see, for the past 8 years, since my beloved wife Sylvia passed away, I've been conducting an experiment. Not in a laboratory, but in life. I wanted to understand what happens when you remove the variable of wealth from family relationships. What remains when there's no inheritance to chase, no money to manipulate someone for? Christy stood abruptly. This is inappropriate. Sit down, Mrs. Benson, President Katz said quietly but firmly. Security guards were already moving subtly toward the exits. Carlton continued. The results of my experiment were illuminating. I discovered that my daughter-in-law, Christy Benson, has spent years systematically isolating me from my family. Telling my grandson that I disapproved of him, a lie. Telling my son that I was becoming mentally incompetent, another lie. all while attempting to forge my signature to gain power of attorney over my assets. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Christy tried to move toward the aisle, but Paul grabbed her arm, his face a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. "But it gets more interesting," Carlton said, his tone almost conversational now, like he was delivering a fascinating lecture. "6 months ago, I hired a private investigator. Laura Lester, are you here?" A woman in the middle section stood. "Present, Dr. Benson." Ms. Lester discovered that Mrs. Benson has embezzled approximately $297,000 from my son's company over the past 2 years. She's also been conducting an extramarital affair with my son's business partner, Mr. Stuart Mosley, who is conveniently seated right next to her. The auditorium exploded in noise. Christy was screaming denials. Stuart Mosley bolted for the exit, only to be intercepted by 2 police officers who'd been waiting in the wings. Paul sat frozen, his face in his hands. Carlton raised his voice slightly. "I've provided all evidence to the district attorney's office. Warrants were issued this morning." He looked directly at Christy. "You told me not to embarrass you today. I'm afraid I must disappoint you." 2 more officers approached the family section. Christy was shrieking now, pointing at Carlton, calling him a vindictive old man, a liar. But her protests died as the officer began reading her rights. Carlton turned back to the microphone. "I apologize to the graduating class for this disruption, but I want you all to remember something as you go out into the world. Character isn't revealed in moments of comfort and abundance. It's revealed when you think no one important is watching. Treat people with dignity regardless of their perceived status, because you never know who might surprise you." He paused, then smiled. "Now, I believe there's a young man who's about to graduate summa cum laude, who also happens to be the first recipient of the Carlton Benson Excellence Scholarship for Graduate Studies. Jordan Benson, this is your day. Don't let anyone take it from you." The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous standing ovation. Jordan was crying, Carlton could see, but smiling through his tears. As Carlton left the stage, President Katz whispered, "That was either the bravest or most reckless thing I've ever seen." "Sometimes," Carlton replied, "they're the same thing." The aftermath of the graduation ceremony rippled through the community like shockwaves from an earthquake. Carlton sat in his small apartment that evening, watching the local news coverage with a cup of tea growing cold in his hands. The reporter stood outside Whitmore University, her face grave as she detailed the arrest of Christy Benson and Stuart Mosley on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Colleagues from his old academic life, people he hadn't spoken to in years, calling to congratulate him or express shock or simply demand to know the full story. He let most calls go to voicemail, but there was one call he'd been waiting for. When Paul's name finally appeared on his screen at nearly 11 p.m., Carlton answered immediately. "Dad." Paul's voice was hoarse, broken. I don't even know where to start." "Start with what you need to say," Carlton replied gently. A long silence stretched between them. Carlton could hear Paul's breathing, ragged and unsteady. "I failed you," Paul finally said. "I failed Mom's memory. I failed Jordan. I failed myself." A sound that might have been a sob. "How did I become so weak?" "You became lonely after your mother died," Carlton said. Christy saw that vulnerability and exploited it. "That's not weakness, Paul. That's being human. But I chose her over you. Over and over again. Every time she said something cruel about you, every time she excluded you from family events, I let it happen. I told myself it was easier to keep the peace." Carlton closed his eyes, remembering those moments of exclusion, of casual cruelty. They still stung, but not as much as knowing his son had been suffering too. "You're my father," Paul continued, voice cracking. "You're one of the most brilliant men I know, and I let her treat you like you were nothing. Like you were some embarrassing burden we had to tolerate. God, Dad, you founded a research center. You have a doctorate. You've accomplished more than I ever will. And I let her convince me you were just some pathetic old man living on scraps." Carlton finished. "Yes, but that was intentional on my part, Paul. I needed to see who people truly were when they thought I had nothing to offer them. That doesn't make what I did okay. No, Carlton agreed. It doesn't. But it gives us a starting point for rebuilding. If you want to rebuild. I do. Paul's voice was fervent now. God, Dad, I do. I've already contacted a divorce attorney. After what I saw today, after what the police told me about the evidence you'd gathered, I can't believe I was so blind. Carlton had spent the hours after the ceremony with detectives, walking them through his documentation. Christie's affair with Stewart had been more than just physical. They'd been planning to drain Paul's business completely and disappear. They'd been weeks away from executing their plan when Carlton had struck first. The business, Paul said. Stewart had access to everything. I need to do a full audit, figure out how bad the damage is. I can help with that, Carlton offered. I may be old, but I'm still good with numbers. You shouldn't have to. Paul, let me help. Let me be your father again. Another silence, then. I'd like that. I'd really like that. They talked for another hour, making plans, discussing legal strategies, and slowly, painfully, beginning to rebuild what had been broken. When they finally hung up, Carlton felt exhausted but lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed again immediately. This time it was Jordan. Grandpa, can I come over? It's almost midnight, Jordan. Don't you have celebrations to attend? I left the party early. I need to see you. 20 minutes later, Jordan sat on Carlton's worn couch, still in his graduation clothes, minus the cap and gown. He looked older somehow, like the events of the day had aged him. I should have done something sooner, Jordan said. I knew Mom was treating you badly. I knew, and I just kept visiting you in secret like some kind of coward. You were caught between loyalty to your mother and loyalty to me, Carlton said. That's an impossible position for anyone, especially a child. I'm not a child anymore. No, Carlton agreed. You proved that today. The way you stood and applauded, even though you knew it would infuriate your mother. That took courage. Jordan's hands twisted together. Did you know she tried to convince me not to major in environmental science? She said it was a useless tree hugger degree and that I should do business like Dad. When I refused, she cut off my allowance. Said if I wanted to waste my life, I could do it on my own dime. Carlton hadn't known that detail. What did you do? Got a job at the campus bookstore. Worked 20 hours a week while taking 18 credits. Jordan smiled bitterly. Mom told people I was working because I enjoyed it, like it was some kind of character-building exercise she'd arranged. Your father doesn't know this? Dad doesn't know a lot of things. He's been so checked out the past few years. It's like he's there physically, but not really present, you know? Carlton did know. He'd watched his vibrant, confident son slowly disappear into himself, worn down by years of Christie's manipulation and contempt. Things are going to change now, Carlton said. Your father and I talked tonight. Really talked for the first time in years. Is he divorcing her? Yes. Jordan nodded, looking relieved. Good. She never loved him. I don't think she's capable of loving anyone except herself. What about you? Carlton asked. How are you handling all this? Jordan was quiet for a moment. Honestly, part of me feels guilty for being relieved. Like, my mom just got arrested, and I should be devastated, but instead I just feel free. Is that terrible? It's honest, Carlton said. Christy may have given birth to you, but she stopped being a mother to you long ago. You don't owe her your grief. The scholarship, Jordan said, changing subjects. The Carlton Benson Excellence Scholarship. That's for graduate school. Full tuition, stipend for living expenses, research funding. I want you to be able to focus on your studies without worrying about money or working yourself to exhaustion. Jordan's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you tell me? All this time, I thought you were barely scraping by, and you were secretly this accomplished scientist with millions of dollars. Because I needed to know who you were without the influence of money, Carlton said gently. And you showed me, Jordan. Every week, you came to visit me in this tiny apartment. You brought me books from the library, helped me with grocery shopping, listened to my stories about your grandmother. You did all of that when you thought I had nothing to offer you except my company. You're my grandpa, Jordan said, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. You're a good man, Jordan. You have your grandmother's kindness and your grandfather's stubbornness. That's a powerful combination. They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who genuinely understand each other. What happens now? Jordan finally asked. With Mom and Stuart, I mean. They'll face trial. The evidence is overwhelming. Financial records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations. Your mother's attorney will probably suggest a plea deal. How long do you think she'll go to prison? That depends on many factors, Carlton said carefully. But embezzlement of that amount, combined with fraud and forgery, she's looking at significant time. Stuart, too. Jordan absorbed this information with a maturity that impressed Carlton. And Dad, your father is strong. He's just forgotten it. We're going to help him remember. We, you, me, and some other people who care about him. It's going to take time, Jordan. Healing always does. But I think we're all finally ready to do the work. Jordan nodded, then leaned his head on Carlton's shoulder like he used to do as a small child. Thank you, Grandpa, for everything. For the scholarship, but also for being you. For not letting her destroy your spirit. Carlton wrapped his arm around his grandson. She never could have, Jordan, because I had you. Every week, when you walked through that door, you reminded me what really mattered. Not money or status or recognition. Just love, honestly given. They sat that way until Jordan fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional toll of the day. Carlton gently maneuvered him to lie down properly on the couch, covered him with a blanket, and returned to his chair to keep watch. Outside, the city continued its nightly rhythm. But inside Carlton's small apartment, something fundamental had shifted. The lies had been exposed, the manipulation revealed, and truth, painful as it was, had finally won. The following weeks unfolded with the relentless precision of falling dominoes. Carlton moved through each day with purpose, orchestrating the next phase of his plan with the same meticulous care he'd once applied to his laboratory research. The first domino was Paul's business. Carlton arrived at his son's office building on Monday morning, carrying a briefcase full of forensic accounting software and a determination to uncover every penny Christie and Stuart had stolen. Paul looked awful. He'd lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally crisp appearance was rumpled. But there was something different in his posture, a straightening of the spine, perhaps, or a hardening of the jaw. He was angry, Carlton realized. Genuinely, righteously angry. And anger, properly channeled, could be a powerful catalyst for change. Dad, Paul said, standing as Carlton entered his office. You didn't have to come down here. I could have hired an accountant. I am an accountant, Carlton interrupted mildly. Among other things. I managed research grants for 30 years, Paul. I know how to find money that doesn't want to be found. They worked side by side for hours, combing through financial records, cross-referencing transactions, building a comprehensive picture of the theft. What they discovered was worse than even Carlton had anticipated. Stuart hadn't just been stealing from the company. He'd been setting Paul up to take the fall. Falsified expense reports bore Paul's forged signature. Payments to shell companies were routed through accounts that appeared to be under Paul's control. If Stuart and Christie's plan had succeeded, Paul wouldn't just have been bankrupted. He would have been facing criminal charges himself. I trusted him, Paul said, staring at a spreadsheet that showed a $50,000 payment to a company that didn't exist. We went to business school together. He was at my wedding. When Mom died, he was one of the pallbearers. Some people view relationships as opportunities for exploitation, Carlton said. Stuart saw your grief, your distraction, and he used it, just like Christie did. They deserve each other. They do. And they'll have plenty of time to enjoy each other's company in prison. Paul's lawyer, a sharp woman named Cassie Kirk, arrived that afternoon. She reviewed their findings with a critical eye, making notes, asking pointed questions. When they finished, she sat back with a grim smile. This is even better than the DA hoped. With this evidence, combined with what Dr. Benson already provided, we're looking at 15 to 20 years for both of them. Maybe more if the judge decides to make an example. What about the business? Paul asked. Can we recover any of the money? Some. Stuart had assets we can seize, his house, his car, some investments. Christie spent most of what she stole, but we can go after her jewelry, her designer wardrobe, anything of value. You won't get back everything, but you'll get something. After Cassie left, Paul turned to Carlton. Move in with me. Carlton blinked. What? Move in with me. That apartment you're living in, you chose it to prove a point, and you proved it. But you shouldn't have to keep living in a place that's barely big enough to turn around in. The house is huge, especially now that. He trailed off. Now that Christie's in jail awaiting trial, Carlton finished. Yes, Jordan's room is still there, but he'll be heading to graduate school soon. There are 3 other bedrooms sitting empty. You can have your own space, your own bathroom, privacy when you want it. And Paul's voice broke slightly. I'd really like to have my father around. I missed you, Dad. I've missed us. Carlton felt emotion swell in his chest. I like that too, son. The second domino fell 3 days later, when Christie's preliminary hearing made the news. Carlton didn't attend. He'd given his testimony to investigators and had no desire to see Christie in person. But Jordan went to support Paul and reported back that evening. She tried to play the victim, Jordan said, disgust evident in his voice. Her lawyer stood up and said she was a devoted wife and mother who'd made some mistakes in judgment. Mistakes, like stealing $300,000, is the same as forgetting to buy milk at the store. They were in Paul's house now, Carlton's new home. He'd moved in over the weekend, with Jordan's enthusiastic help. His old apartment had been stripped bare, his meager possessions revealing how little he'd actually needed all these years. His books, his photographs of Sylvia, his research notes, the clothes that actually mattered, all of it fit in the back of Paul's Mercedes with room to spare. Now he sat in a spacious study overlooking the backyard, surrounded by built-in bookshelves that Paul had insisted he fill with his old academic texts. What did the prosecutor say? Carlton asked. She brought up everything. The embezzlement, the affair, the forged power of attorney documents. Then she showed the court those recordings you made. The ones where Mom called you a senile old fool who should just die already and stop being a burden. Carlton remembered those conversations. They'd occurred at a family dinner he'd attended 8 months ago, before he'd fully committed to his current course of action. Christie had been drunk, expansive, cruel. She told Sylvia Stevenson, a neighbor, that Carlton was becoming incontinent and delusional, and that she was heroically shouldering the burden of his care. Every word a lie, all captured by the recording device in his hearing aid. The judge denied bail. Jordan continued. Said she was a flight risk given the affair with Stewart and the evidence of planning to flee the country. She'll stay in jail until trial. Paul entered the study carrying 3 mugs of coffee. He'd started cooking again, Carlton noticed. Simple things. Eggs for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for dinner. But it was progress. For years, Christie had insisted on catered meals or expensive restaurants, claiming cooking was beneath her status. Stewart's family posted his bail, Paul said, settling into a chair. $500,000. His parents mortgaged their house. They'll lose it when he flees, Carlton predicted. Paul frowned. You think he'll run? I know he will. Stewart's a coward at heart. Always has been. He'll jump bail within 2 weeks. How can you be so sure? Carlton smiled slightly. Because I've been studying human behavior for 50 years, and Stewart's type is predictable. He spent his entire life taking the easy route, cutting corners, blaming others when things go wrong. Now he's facing 20 years in prison for embezzlement and conspiracy. He'll convince himself he can outsmart the system, that he deserves a second chance, that the rules don't really apply to people like him. Should we warn someone? Already did. I had coffee with Judge Gilbert Brown yesterday. We served on a university committee together back in the 90s. He's had Stewart's passport flagged and assigned a bail enforcement agent to watch him closely. Jordan laughed. Grandpa, you're like some kind of criminal mastermind, except for good. I prefer a strategically minded individual with a strong sense of justice, Carlton replied dryly. The third domino fell exactly 13 days later, when Stewart Mosley cut off his ankle monitor and attempted to board a private plane to Mexico. He was arrested at the airport, his bail revoked, and his parents' house, mortgaged to secure his freedom, went into foreclosure. Carlton read the news on his tablet over breakfast, allowing himself a small moment of satisfaction. Predictable. Utterly predictable. Did you orchestrate that somehow? Paul asked, peering over Carlton's shoulder. I simply understood the probability of certain outcomes based on behavioral analysis, Carlton said. Stewart made his own choices. But there was more to the story, and Carlton knew it. He'd had Laura Lester, his private investigator, plant information about an easy escape route through a poorly monitored private airfield. He'd known Stewart would jump at the opportunity, unable to resist what seemed like a lucky break. Some might call entrapment. Carlton called it justice with a helping hand. 6 weeks after the graduation ceremony, the Benson family found itself in an unfamiliar position. Together, functional and cautiously optimistic. Jordan had decided to defer his graduate school admission for 1 semester. I want to spend time with you and Dad, he'd explained to Carlton. Real time, not visits squeezed around Mom's social calendar or secret meetings at your apartment. Just family time. So they'd fallen into a routine. Morning coffee together, Carlton and Paul working side by side to rebuild the business. Jordan helping where he could while also working part-time at an environmental nonprofit. Dinners around the kitchen table. Conversations that ranged from trivial to profound. Laughter that felt rusty at first, but grew more natural with practice. Christie's trial was scheduled for October. Her attorney had attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office, emboldened by the overwhelming evidence and public interest in the case, had refused anything less than 15 years. Christie, ever delusional about her chances, had rejected the offer. She actually believes she'll be acquitted, Paul reported after a meeting with prosecutors. Her lawyer told Mine that Christie is convinced the jury will see her as a sympathetic figure, a woman driven to desperate acts by a controlling father-in-law and an inattentive husband. She's going to blame you? Jordan asked, outraged. And me, Carlton added calmly. I expect nothing less. Christie has never accepted responsibility for anything in her life. Why would she start now? But Carlton had one more card to play, and he was waiting for exactly the right moment. That moment came in mid-August, when Christie's attorney filed a motion claiming that Carlton had engaged in elder financial abuse by hiding his wealth from his family, and that Christie's actions were merely attempts to protect her husband from his father's financial manipulation. It was such a brazen reversal of reality that Carlton actually laughed when he read the filing. She's claiming I financially abused myself? He said to Cassie Kirk, who'd stopped by to discuss the motion. It's a Hail Mary, Cassie explained. They're hoping to muddy the waters, create reasonable doubt. If they can paint you as a manipulative figure who deliberately impoverished himself to make Christie look bad, they might convince a jury that her actions were somehow justified. They won't succeed, Carlton said confidently. How can you be sure? Because I have evidence they don't know about. Evidence I've been saving for exactly this scenario. He pulled out a file he'd kept locked in his study desk. Inside were documents dating back 9 years, to just after Sylvia's death. Medical records showing Carlton's perfect cognitive function. Financial statements proving his wealth had never disappeared. It had simply been placed in trusts and investments under his sole control. And most damning of all, recordings of conversations between Christie and Stewart, made during their affair, where Christie explicitly discussed getting rid of the old man and making sure Paul doesn't waste his inheritance on his loser father. Cassie read through the documents, her eyes widening. This is... Dr. Benson, why didn't you provide this earlier? Because I needed Christie to commit fully to her defense strategy, Carlton explained. If I'd shown my full hand at the beginning, her attorney would have advised a plea deal. But now she's invested in this narrative of me as a manipulative elder. She's probably planning to testify, to tell the jury how she was just trying to protect her family from my schemes. And when she does, we'll destroy her credibility completely. You've been planning this for 9 years, Cassie said slowly. Since your wife died. I've been documenting Christie's true nature for 9 years, Carlton corrected. Planning her downfall? That only started about 2 years ago, when I realized she would never change, and that my son and grandson deserved better. Paul, who'd been listening from the doorway, walked in. Dad, these recordings. Getting rid of the old man. Did she mean, kill me? Carlton asked bluntly. Possibly. More likely, she meant institutionalize me in a facility where I'd be isolated and forgotten. Either way, the intent was clear. remove me from the family so she could control everything. Paul's hands clenched into fists. I brought her into our lives. I married her. I let her. You love someone who didn't deserve it, Carlton interrupted. That's not a character flaw, Paul. It's evidence of your capacity for love. Christy is the one who failed, not you. But I should have seen, should have, could have, would have, Carlton said firmly. Those words change nothing. What matters is what we do now. And right now, we're going to make sure Christy faces the full consequences of her actions. The trial began on October 15th. Carlton attended every day, sitting in the front row of the gallery, his presence a constant reminder to Christy of exactly how much she'd underestimated him. The prosecution built their case methodically. Financial experts testified about the embezzlement. Computer forensics specialists explained how Christy and Stewart had covered their tracks. Handwriting analysts confirmed the forged signatures. Laura Lester, the private investigator, detailed the surveillance that had documented Christy's affair and her attempts to obtain power of attorney through fraud. Christy sat at the defense table, perfectly coiffed and made up, her expression one of wounded innocence. She dressed in soft colors, her wardrobe carefully chosen to project vulnerability. Her attorney, a man named Vernon Walton with a reputation for winning unwinnable cases, portrayed her as a woman overwhelmed by circumstances, married to a man whose father had deliberately created chaos in their lives. Dr. Carlton Benson is a brilliant man, Walton told the jury in his opening statement. But brilliance can be weaponized. For years, he pretended to be poor, living in squalor, making his family believe he needed care and support, all while sitting on a fortune of $12 million. What kind of man does that? What kind of father tortures his own son with false worry, false guilt? It was a compelling narrative, Carlton had to admit. If he were a juror hearing this for the first time, he might even be swayed. But then the prosecution began introducing the evidence Carlton had provided. The recordings played in the hushed courtroom, Christy's voice clear and cold. Once we get power of attorney, we can dump him in the cheapest nursing home we can find. One of those places where they warehouse old people until they die. He won't last 6 months. Stewart's voice. What about Paul? Christy, laughing. Paul does what I tell him. He's too weak to stand up to me. Always has been. Paul sat beside Carlton, his jaw clenched, tears streaming silently down his face. Jordan held his father's hand, his own expression furious. The recordings went on. Christy discussing how to steal from Paul's business. Christy mocking Carlton's supposed poverty. Christy planning her future with Stewart, joking about how she'd traded up from Paul. By the time the prosecution rested, Vernon Walton's confident expression had cracked. But he wasn't done fighting. He put Christy on the stand. She testified for 3 hours, her performance Oscar-worthy. Yes, she'd had an affair, but only because Paul had become distant and cold. Yes, she'd taken money from the business, but she believed it was marital funds she had a right to access. Yes, she tried to get power of attorney over Carlton, but only because she genuinely worried about his mental decline. I love my father-in-law, Christy said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. I wanted to help him. When I saw him living in that terrible apartment, wearing those old clothes, I thought he was suffering from dementia. I thought he'd forgotten about his money, or lost it somehow. I was trying to protect him. It was a masterful performance. Several jurors looked sympathetic. Then the prosecution's cross-examination began. The prosecutor, a woman named Tara Whitaker, approached with a document in hand. Mrs. Benson, you testified that you believe your father-in-law was suffering from dementia. Is that correct? Yes. And you wanted to help him? Of course. Then can you explain this email? Tara handed copies to the jury. Sent from your account to Stuart Mosley, dated March 15th of this year. You write, and I quote, "The old bastard is sharper than ever. He actually caught my lie about the expense report yesterday. We need to move faster before he figures out what we're really doing." Christy paled. Doesn't sound like you thought he had dementia, Tara continued relentlessly. In fact, it sounds like you knew exactly how mentally competent he was, and you were afraid of him discovering your criminal activities. I was just venting. I didn't mean. You also testified that you took money from the business because you believed it was marital funds. But isn't it true that you created shell companies specifically to hide these transactions from your husband? Stewart handled that. I didn't know. You didn't know about the shell companies you personally incorporated? The ones with your signature on the formation documents? The ones that list you as the primary officer? The cross-examination continued for 2 more hours, each question peeling away another layer of Christie's carefully constructed lies. By the end, she was crying, real tears this time, born of desperation and fear. Carlton felt no satisfaction in her pain, only a deep sense of justice being served. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Christie screamed. She had to be physically restrained as she lunged toward Carlton, shrieking accusations and curses. Security guards dragged her from the courtroom, her designer heels scraping against the floor. Vernon Walton packed his briefcase in silence, his face professionally neutral despite the devastating loss. And Carlton sat quietly, holding his son's hand, while Jordan wept with relief. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Judge Gilbert Brown presided, his expression grave as he reviewed the pre-sentencing reports. Mrs. Benson, he began, I've been on the bench for 27 years. In that time, I've seen many defendants pass through this courtroom. Some are products of desperation or circumstance. Some make terrible mistakes in moments of weakness. And some, he paused, looking directly at Christie. Some are simply cruel. Christie stared back, her expression defiant even now. Your actions weren't born of necessity, Judge Brown continued. You didn't steal to feed hungry children or pay medical bills. You stole out of greed. You betrayed your husband. You attempted to abuse a vulnerable elderly man. You lied repeatedly under oath. You have shown no remorse, no accountability, no understanding of the harm you've caused. He shuffled papers, then looked up again. The prosecution has recommended 15 years. I'm going to exceed that recommendation. I sentence you to 23 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 18 years. Additionally, you will be required to pay full restitution to your husband and father-in-law, and you are permanently prohibited from having any contact with Jordan Benson. Christie's composure finally shattered completely. She collapsed in her chair, sobbing, while her attorney looked defeated. Stuart Mosley, tried separately, received a similar sentence. The two people who'd planned to run away together would instead spend decades apart, in separate facilities, their dreams of freedom reduced to ash. As they left the courthouse, Jordan turned to Carlton. Is it wrong that I don't feel bad for her? No, Carlton said. You're allowed to feel relief that a toxic presence has been removed from your life. That's not cruelty, it's self-preservation. Paul had been quiet since the sentencing, lost in thought. Finally, he spoke. I wasted 8 years of my life with her. 8 years I can never get back. You also got Jordan from those years, Carlton pointed out gently. That's not a waste. Paul smiled slightly, looking at his son. No, that's the one good thing she ever gave me. Then focus on that, Carlton advised. Don't let Christie steal any more of your life. She's taken enough. Life settled into a new normal over the following months. Paul threw himself into rebuilding his business, using the restitution funds from Christie and Stewart's seized assets to shore up the company's finances. Carlton helped, bringing his analytical mind to bear on problems of efficiency and growth. Jordan prepared for graduate school, which would begin in January. He'd chosen to study at Whitmore University, wanting to be close to family after years of isolation. Carlton had been honored when Jordan told him, I want to follow in your footsteps, Grandpa. Not exactly environmental science, not molecular biology, but in the same spirit, building something that matters. The Carlton Benson Center for Advanced Molecular Research opened in November with great fanfare. Carlton gave a speech about the importance of scientific inquiry and the responsibility scientists have to mentor the next generation. He announced an additional scholarship fund specifically for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, funded by royalties from his old patents. President Martha Katz pulled him aside afterward. You're using your revenge tour to do good in the world. I respect that. It was never about revenge, Carlton corrected. It was about justice. And once justice is served, what remains should be used constructively. Semantics, Martha said, but she was smiling. Christmas arrived with unexpected warmth. For the first time in nearly a decade, Carlton felt genuinely happy during the holidays. Paul had decorated the house. Jordan had baked cookies using Sylvia's old recipes, and the three of them spent Christmas Eve together, sharing stories and memories. "Tell us about Grandma," Jordan asked. "The real stories, not just the polite ones." Carlton laughed and obliged, recounting Sylvia's sharp wit, her terrible singing voice, her absolutely deadly skill at poker. "She won $1,000 off my department head once," he remembered. He was so confident, thought she was just a professor's wife who didn't know what she was doing. "She cleaned him out in 2 hours. I wish I'd known her better," Jordan said wistfully. "I was only 11 when she died." "She knew you, though," Carlton said, "and she loved you fiercely. Her last words to me were about you, actually. She said, 'Make sure Jordan knows he can be anything he wants. Don't let anyone dim his light.' Is that why you fought so hard?" Jordan asked. "Against Mom and her plans?" "Partially," Carlton admitted. "But I also fought for Paul, and for myself, and for the principle that cruelty shouldn't win. Your grandmother believed in standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. I was honoring her memory." Paul raised his glass of wine. "To Sylvia, and to Dad, for being exactly the man she knew he was." They toasted, and Carlton felt Sylvia's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. Spring brought new beginnings. Jordan started graduate school with characteristic enthusiasm, diving into research on sustainable agriculture and soil remediation. Paul's business not only recovered, but began to thrive, freed from Stuart's toxic influence and managed with newfound confidence. And Carlton found himself in an unexpected position, happy. He'd spent so many years focused on research, on building a legacy, on fighting injustice. Now, at 79, he discovered the simple joy of being present. He attended Jordan's research presentations, helped Paul strategize business expansions, and even started dating again, a retired literature professor named Lucinda Fisher who'd lost her husband around the same time Sylvia had died. "You're glowing," Lucinda told him one evening over dinner. "It's quite attractive on you." Carlton smiled. "I'm finally living the life I should have been living all along. No pretense, no games, no hiding who I am." "Do you regret the years you spent pretending to be poor?" He considered the question carefully. "No, because those years taught me essential truths about the people around me. I learned who loved me for myself and who saw me as a means to an end. That knowledge was worth the discomfort." "And Christy? Do you think about her in prison?" "Rarely," Carlton admitted. "She made her choices. She's living with the consequences. I moved on." But that wasn't entirely true. Sometimes, late at night, Carlton did think about Christy, not with anger or satisfaction, but with a kind of anthropological curiosity. What created a person capable of such calculated cruelty? Was it nature or nurture? Could she have been different under other circumstances? He'd never know. And ultimately, it didn't matter. Christy's psychology was her own burden to carry. In May, Carlton received a letter. It came from the federal prison where Christy was incarcerated, and his first instinct was to throw it away unopened. But curiosity won out. The letter was brief, written in Christy's familiar handwriting. "Dr. Benson, I'm sure you're surprised to hear from me. I'm writing because my therapist suggested I make amends as part of my rehabilitation. So here it is. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I underestimated you. I'm sorry I thought you were weak and pathetic. I'm sorry I tried to steal from you and isolate you from your family. But I'm not sorry I fought for what I wanted. You had so much money, respect, a brilliant career. It didn't seem fair that you could just sit on all that while Paul and I struggled. So yes, I took what I thought should have been ours. And I'd probably do it again if given the chance, because people like you don't deserve everything when people like me have nothing. Your formerly beloved daughter-in-law, Christy." Carlton read the letter twice, then showed it to Paul and Jordan. "She's completely insane," Jordan said flatly. That's not an apology. That's a justification. She still doesn't get it, Paul added, shaking his head. After everything, she still thinks she was somehow entitled to Dad's money. Carlton carefully folded the letter and placed it in a file. This is actually perfect. It confirms that my assessment of her character was correct. She's incapable of genuine remorse or growth. 23 years in prison won't change her fundamental nature. Are you going to respond? Jordan asked. No, Christy isn't worth my time or emotional energy. She got exactly what she deserved, and nothing she says now can change that. He threw the letter away that night, the final severance of any remaining connection. Jordan's graduation from the master's program came 2 years later. Carlton sat in the audience, this time in the family section between Paul and Lucinda. He wore his academic regalia, Paul had insisted, and watched with pride as Jordan crossed the stage to receive his diploma. Afterward, at the reception, Jordan introduced Carlton to his research advisor, a young professor named Gilbert Brown Jr., Judge Brown's son, as it turned out. Your grandson is brilliant, Gilbert said. We've already discussed him continuing for a PhD. His work on mycorrhizal networks for contaminated soil remediation could be groundbreaking. Carlton beamed. He gets it from his grandmother. She was the real genius in our family. Jordan laughed. Grandpa, you literally have 17 published papers and 3 patents. You can't keep attributing your brilliance to Grandma. I can, and I will. False modesty is a virtue. That's not how false modesty works. They bantered easily, the kind of comfortable teasing that only exists in families where love is genuine and freely expressed. Later, as the sun set over the campus, Carlton stood with Paul watching Jordan talk animatedly with other graduate students. Thank you, Paul said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. For fighting for our family, even when I was too weak to fight alongside you. For being exactly the father I needed, even when I didn't deserve it. Carlton put his arm around his son's shoulders. You always deserved it, Paul. You just forgot for a while. We all forget sometimes who we're meant to be. Who are you meant to be? Paul asked. Carlton thought about the question. For so many years, he defined himself by his research, his academic achievements, his professional reputation. Then he defined himself by his mission to expose Christy and protect his family. But now, I'm meant to be here, he said finally. With you, with Jordan, with Lucinda. Building relationships instead of just legacies. Being present instead of always planning the next experiment. I'm meant to be Carlton Benson the man, not just Dr. Benson the scientist. I like Carlton Benson the man, Paul said. He's pretty great. He's getting there, Carlton agreed. 5 years after the graduation ceremony that changed everything, Carlton Benson sat in his study on a quiet Sunday afternoon. He was 83 now, his hair completely silver, his movements a bit slower, but his mind still sharp as ever. On his desk sat a letter from Jordan, now Dr. Jordan Benson, newly hired as an assistant professor at Whitmore University. The letter was full of excitement about his first semester teaching, about the research grants he'd received, about the students who reminded him why he'd chosen this path. Grandpa, Jordan had written, I'm teaching in the same building where you did your groundbreaking work. Sometimes I walk past the lab that's now named after you, and I feel this connection to history, to legacy, to something bigger than myself. Thank you for showing me that success isn't about wealth or status. It's about making the world a little better than you found it. Carlton smiled and carefully filed the letter with hundreds of others he'd received over the years. From former students, from colleagues, from people whose lives he'd touched in ways large and small. Paul knocked on the doorframe. Dad, Lucinda's here. She brought pie. I'll be right there. Carlton stood, his knees protesting slightly, and took one last look around his study. The shelves were full of books, the walls covered with photographs. Sylvia, young and laughing. Paul as a child. Jordan at various ages. Group photos from conferences and celebrations. Lucinda at their quiet wedding last year. A good life, he thought. Not perfect, not without pain, but good. He joined his family in the kitchen, where Lucinda was serving pie and telling a story that had Paul laughing. This was his real legacy, not the research center or the patents or the publications. This warmth, this love, this proof that even after everything, kindness and truth had won. Christy was still in prison, with 13 years remaining on her sentence. Stuart had suffered a heart attack 2 years ago and died in the prison infirmary. The business Paul had rebuilt was thriving. Jordan was following in Carlton's footsteps while forging his own path. And Carlton? Carlton was simply, finally, completely content. As they sat together eating pie and sharing stories, Carlton realized that his greatest achievement hadn't been exposing Christie's crimes or reclaiming his family. It had been simpler than that. He'd refused to let cruelty break him. He'd maintained his dignity, his values, his fundamental belief that people deserve to be judged by their character rather than their circumstances. "What are you thinking about?" Lucinda asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "Justice," Carlton said, "and how sometimes it requires patience, strategy, and a willingness to endure short-term pain for long-term victory." "Still thinking like a scientist," Paul teased. "Always," Carlton agreed. "But now I'm thinking like a grandfather and husband too." Multiple variables in the equation of life. Jordan raised his glass of lemonade. "To Grandpa, the smartest man I know and the kindest." "To Dad," Paul added, "who taught me that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about always getting back up." "To Carlton," Lucinda finished, "who proves that being good is more important than being powerful, but being both is even better." They toasted, and Carlton felt a profound sense of peace. The battle was over. Justice had been served, and life, messy and complicated and beautiful, continued forward. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and Carlton was preparing for bed, he found himself standing by the window, looking out at the garden Lucinda had planted. Roses bloomed in the moonlight, their perfume drifting through the open window. He thought about that graduation ceremony 5 years ago, about the moment when he'd climbed those stairs to the stage and watched Christie's face transform from smug confidence to shocked horror. It had been satisfying, yes, but not in the vengeful way he'd imagined. The real satisfaction had come from what happened after, from rebuilding his relationship with Paul, from watching Jordan flourish, from creating a family based on honesty and love rather than manipulation and lies. Revenge, Carlton had learned, was ultimately hollow. Justice, on the other hand, justice paired with forgiveness and forward movement, that was transformative. He climbed in a bed beside Lucinda, who murmured sleepily and curled against him. "Good night, Sylvia," he whispered to the darkness, as he did every night. "I hope I made you proud." And somewhere in the space between waking and dreaming, he felt her answer. "You did, my love. You did." This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.